Hey guys, welcome back to my channel for part 2 on how to make foam latex prosthetics. So you sculpted a prosthetic piece and now you need to mold it. You're going to need a few things. You're going to need a strong plaster. I use Ultra Cal 30. You'll also need a clay for flashing. I use a cheaper sulfur-free plastiline that I found at Hobby Lobby. I will link all of these items down below. You'll need a few of your sculpting supplies and you will need burlap pieces. I use a big fabric roll of burlap and I just cut chunks off. This is going to add strength in your mold, as you'll see later on. And then you'll also need a chip brush, which is like $1 little brush that will help with applying your plaster. So first you're going to need to create the flashing around your sculpt. This is going to help get feather thin edges on your piece, which is what you want. So let's get into that. Alrighty then, so for the flashing, again, this is going to give you that nice thin edge that you want. I always start with the eyes. I just put a blob in there. I try to make it as clean and even as possible. Once I have the clay kind of smushed down where I want it, I will carve off around the edges, if that makes sense. You can kind of see where I take that tool and it just gives a nice little ledge and like a lip where that flashing is. So I'm not really sure why this helps so much. I don't know the science behind it, but it definitely makes my edges nice and clean, so just do it. For the outside edge, I'll typically roll up a long little clay sausage. This helps me get an even height around the whole thing. Sometimes I get lazy, like right there, and just do kind of a blob, but you want to make it as even as possible. This is going to give you a nicer, cleaner, more professional looking mold. And then once I have that on there, I do the same thing where I just trim the edge to give a nice clean lip on it. Yeah, it just makes it look a lot more clean and professional, so do that. And then once I have that, there you go, showing it off. That's what it should look like. I make a type of clay bowl situation around it. I take chunks of clay. I usually like roll out some clay and kind of cut it into pieces to do this. Because I do it so much, I typically have some from the last mold and I just kind of flatten it out and try to straighten it up so that I don't have to roll it out every time. But you can roll it out with a roller like I have there in my lap to make it nice and clean. This extra bowl-like bit is going to help a lot with catching the extra plaster so you're not making a humongous mess, and you can kind of save the plaster and push it back up there. One last step that I like to do is create what they call keys. I cut out 2 circle shapes above the forehead and one underneath the chin into the flashing. This is going to help lock your mold into place. There's not a whole lot of surface area that the mold will sit on top of. You'll see it's just the edges there. So the keys will help you lock it into place properly. All right, creating the flashing is super time consuming, but it's worth it in the end when you have those beautiful feather thin edges. So once you've done that, you are ready to get messy and start molding them. So if I have multiple pieces, as you'll see in this video, I do have multiple pieces for my witch. I like to mold them together for time purposes. It really helps. In between each layer, you want it to really start to set up. So it can be really time consuming if you try to do individual pieces. When I was first starting out, I would do one by one because I was so nervous I would mess it up, but it took so much time. So I would recommend still go slow, pay attention to what you're doing, but do them all together. It'll really help. All right, once you have your flashing on there and you're ready to start molding, you do definitely want to add a mold release. I didn't get this in the recording, but you'll just spray an even layer of this. This will just help you to release your mold. And any parts where the plaster cast is showing, it won't, it'll help release it from locking. So let's go ahead and get into molding. All right, when it comes to mixing your UltraCal, you want to always remember to pour your powder into your water. You don't want to do it vice versa. So I use these plastic cups and then I just mix it as needed. It's just easier for me this way. And I will put probably about 1/4 of that cupful of water, and it makes a whole thing of plaster. So you need a lot more powder plaster than you need water, if that makes any sense. So what you do is continue to pour the UltraCal in there. I try to sprinkle it slowly. You can also use your hands to break it up as you pour it in, but you want to add it until the top layer is dry. And that's when you'll want to start mixing it up. You can mix it thicker or thinner if you want to your liking. The first layer, I want it semi-thick, so I make the entire top of the layer like dry. And then I take a chip brush, which is what I have there in the video. I just mix that around in the UltraCal, get it all loaded up, and then I start to splatter and sort of rub it in a little bit. This is going to be your beauty coat. This is our first layer. We want this to capture all of the details. This part is very important. You want as few air bubbles as possible. So you don't want to use the brush so much to where it's whipping air in there. You want to make it do the opposite. You want to try to make sure there's no air bubbles in there and you're capturing all of the detail. So you keep adding plaster over and over until basically you don't see any of the detail of the sculpt anymore. You want to have a good thick layer to capture all of your detail. It is runny. You're going to be working against gravity. I'll typically, when it falls into our little bowl structure that we made before, I will just kind of use that brush and brush it back upwards. Once it starts to set up, it's going to be a little bit easier, but just keep adding this until you have a good solid thick layer. Make sure you capture your keys that you made, if you made keys into your flashing, and just get a nice thick layer. Our next step is going to be our structure layer. So make sure this is thick enough and let it set up a little bit before you start adding the next layer. All right, for your next layer, the structure layer, you're going to need burlap. I use a big fabric roll of burlap and I just cut pieces off as I need it. I try to make different size squares and rectangles just so I can get all of the surface area evenly. And this is going to add your structure so that when you're opening your mold, you don't crack it into a million pieces. So you mix up some more UltraCal. I keep it about the same consistency as the first layer, and you dip your burlap in there, soak it through, wring out any excess, and place that on top of your first layer. Now, like I said, let it set up a little bit, that first layer, but you want to rub out the air bubbles like you see me doing there, but you have to be very careful. You do not want to disturb the first layer. Again, that is capturing our detail. You don't want any cracks. You don't want to ruin it. So just be careful when doing this step. But I like to do one full even layer around the whole thing, and then I will add a second layer, trying to overlap certain pieces to make sure it is a solid structure. I also like to make sure the edges are very good and strong. I may fold over pieces on the edges, just making sure they are very thick with the burlap structure. This is where you're going to be prying your mold open, so you want to make sure that that is very strong. And then I'm mixing up my last layer here, and you can see it's hard for me to mix because I made it very thick. I added a lot more UltraCal than normal, and I start to spread that over the top. Technically, it would have been fine to leave it with just the burlap, but it would look very messy, and once the Ultra Cal gets hard, it would scratch up your hands because of all the texture on it. So this is going to make it very pretty and very smooth for your hands. So you just rub that over in a good thick layer. And once it really starts to harden up, you can actually press a little bit harder, as you'll see me do right now, and it helps you get a very, very smooth, pretty mold. Again, looks more professional and also not going to scratch you. So definitely important. And that is it for the mold. Let it sit overnight. All right, that is the molding process. Now, I typically let my molds sit overnight just to make sure that they're completely set up. It typically probably takes a couple of hours for the Ultra Cal to just fully set up, so you could just do it later on in the day, but I just wait till the next day to open mine. I'll take a flathead screwdriver. Where the flashing is, I'll pull off any excess that I can get to, and then I very gently start to pry the mold open with a flathead screwdriver. Now, you don't want to be too rough. You really don't want this to crack. So I usually go all the way around it really gently until it lifts up. All right, that is it for the molding process. I am no molding master, but that is how I do it, and it seems to get the job done. I hope that you learned a thing or two, and we'll be back soon with part 3 on how to run your foam. Whew, that part is stressful, but it's super fun. So it's almost like baking. I mean, it technically is baking, but you don't eat it. But thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you learned something. If you haven't already, hit that red subscribe button down below to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of these videos or other videos that I post. I love you so much, and give this video a thumbs up and comment down below anything else that you want to see. And I hope to see you next time, or the time after that, or the time after that, or the time after that. Okay, bye.